Welcome to this meeting of the Milton Planning Board. It's January 8th, and we're meeting for the 13th time during this fiscal year. And I'm Alex Whiteside, the chairman, and the people at the table will introduce themselves if they care to.
Ed Duffy, member.
Michael Kelly, member.
William Clark, Planning Director.
Emily Martin, Admin Planning Board.
Tim Serwinski, Assistant Town Planner.
Emily Innes, member.
Brian Furs, member.
All right. We're going to meet again on January 22nd and on February 12th thereafter, and then on February 26th, unless someone has an issue with those dates.
I will not be in the country on the 26th.
All right, well, you can raise that
Do
issue
that later on?
later on.
That's fine.
The past minutes we're going to defer until the meeting of the 22nd, so everyone can have plenty of time to consider them. Now, the next order of business is citizen speak, and citizens who have matters of interest to the planning board should feel free to speak at Citizen Speak. However, we will not receive comments on the Thayer Nursery application at Citizen Speak because we're going to have a public hearing, and we would like any comments to be part of the record of the public hearing, and Citizen Speak is an informal part of the meeting, and what is said does not become a part of the record. So would any citizens like to speak? Yes. Come and speak into the microphone. Let me warn you, you're being recorded and televised.
Is that good? Am I heard? Okay. My name is Anna Mandel. I'm on 4 Hawthorne Road, and I'm here. I attended the working meeting last night about the specific properties that need help in Milton, as well as condo conversions and potentially townhouses. I'm specifically talking about the Stalton residence. I heard that there's a bylaw for a bed and breakfast, and I would love for that to be put in place as soon as possible. The Stalton residence is for sale. They also brought down the price today to just over $1 million. So this is really urgent matter if it doesn't want to be bought up by the wrong people. And I would propose some type of luxury bed and breakfast, and that's just all I wanted to say tonight.
Well, the warrant for May is closed.
I had intended to bring one forward for October for B&B.
So we're thinking October. How does that sound to you?
I mean, as long as it's something that's workable and feasible with the town, if I were to purchase it, I wouldn't want like little finicky issues to be brought up, because like the big scale is it's saving the property, and the list of the on the condo conversion, it would solve most of those problems with the B&B. As long as the town would be willing to work with me on that, I'd feel much more comfortable about purchasing it. But because it doesn't exist, I wouldn't want to be caught up later on having put in money into it and then being expected to be able to run it, all of a sudden saying, oh, well, it doesn't exist, it's not going to exist. Here you are with a property that you can't rent out, you can't make money off of, and that won't sell for over a year or more in this marketplace.
Experience with that business by any chance?
With a bed and breakfast? No, but I mean, you hire someone to do it. So.
Well, it does seem to me that your proposal, in that you've got a hotel-sized building to begin with,
Right.
rather than a
Is that
a little.
Yeah.
Dalton residence?
And it's on a really small lot, so
Install.
it's very limited, and there's a very beautiful view. And I know the condo conversion, there was like, can you fit multiple things on it? And honestly, you can't fit much of anything besides that building there. So you could be looking at someone coming in and tearing it down. And that's really sad for a historical function, and I don't even know if anyone would want to tear it down. But
Yes.
The board had discussed a few meetings ago its process for looking at all of the zoning articles for the October town meeting, which would involve some public meetings this spring. So I would urge you to be involved with that. Bed and breakfast will definitely be one of the articles that I will bring forward. There's a list of others that we've all either been talking about or working on for the last couple of months, basically.
Great.
So
But
keep an eye out for that.
what do you think about the general idea that has been bruited?
It's too general to comment on. I mean, the idea of allowing bed and breakfasts in general in Milton, one of the reasons for doing that was to help save larger buildings. The condo conversion is another possible way of doing that.
Yeah.
So certainly it fits in with the general purpose of what we were thinking about. Obviously, the other part of allowing B&Bs is that there's a reasonable assumption that there would be a market for it here, given Curry College, given its proximity to Boston. So that would be the other reason. We've gone back and forth a little bit about what the requirements would be for that. One of them that we had talked about was owner occupancy. So that's something to keep in mind. Signage, noise, there's a couple of other things that we haven't come to agreement with in the past. But I think the public meeting structure we were talking about for all of the zoning articles would help flesh out some of those before we get to our own public hearing, probably about July or so.
But in our mind's eye, in my mind's eye at least, it seems to me that what you propose, I like the idea of a big building rather than just someone's single-family house where they say, let's,
Rent a room.
let's, I mean, as I say, it's sort of a hotel-size building, and preserving such a building makes sense. There's
Absolutely.
historic preservation. I mean, I think that you've got the pieces of making as strong a case for a bed and breakfast bylaw as can be made. And, you know, it may be that we may not want to have them crop up like mushrooms, but
There are different ways of restricting it. Certainly one of the other things would be, can the site accommodate parking for all the uses on site? And so any land and building where the guests would have to park on the street isn't going to be suitable. So that starts to argue for a larger piece of property and a larger house anyway to convert, and that would go well with what you're thinking about. So
yeah, and I mean, the condo conversion part, it could fit there also, but you have to take in mind that you would end up losing a lot of the beautiful architecture, especially on the first floor, and whether or not that's something that's of interest. And so for the bed and breakfast, I mean, it's just a question of creativity, to be honest. How creative can you be? How can you shade the cars? You can't really see them.
right. Buffering would be a key element, probably some sort of restricted signage. Bed and breakfast is breakfast only. It's not, you know, providing dinner, and so that would come into it. So, and there are a number of towns that have good regulations on this. Length of stay is another one that we've talked about here on the planning board, is how do you keep it from being something where people are staying for 3 months at a time, but really more like the hotel, the shorter term stay.
I mean, my worry is that there could be something like an Airbnb type thing with it, and so that would be a temporary thing, and there's not much that would prohibit that either at the moment.
Not at the moment. Right.
And then, but Airbnb is still new, and there are laws that can come in and enforce it different ways. So that's just one other aspect to keep in mind with those types of residences.
so we've given you some comfort.
Yeah, a little bit. Still got to happen, and I mean, it's
No,
still in
we'd be,
October.
we'd be thrilled to work with you and see if we can't.
Great.
I mean, I'm sure that we can get an article to present to the town meeting, and then, of course, you would have to convince them, we would help,
Great.
that the article should be passed.
Right.
So there's some work there, but
I think, I mean, if it's something that is of real interest, it's just having a list of everything that I would need to get done would be the first real step, because this is a very special property, so it doesn't follow the normal bylaws or any of the normal special things. And so just really knowing what I would need to have and who would be able to help with it. would be really great information.
Does Bill have your phone number and email address?
does.
Okay, great. So,
Ed,
Would you please tell me the address you're talking about?
704 Brush Hill Road.
And you call it the Salt and Stove House?
Yes.
great house.
It's beautiful.
Beautiful house.
Okay, I guess, thanks.
Yeah. I mean, the other one thing that could be considered is like a temporary add-in to the condo conversion along similar standards, but it might extend it too much.
and they'd come forward at the same time anyway.
Oh, okay.
so.
All right. That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We look forward to working with you.
Yeah, I still feel at the bank.
All right, now we're going to address the principal matter of the evening, which is an application for a special permit for the Thayer Nursery to conduct a landscaping business, and the application is on file. And what I see the procedure for tonight being is that we will have a presentation from the Thayer Nursery, and then I would suggest we go directly to the public rather than have the board spend hours working without having heard from the public. Let's hear from the public first, and then after that, but not tonight, we will, well, I mean, we may do some of it tonight. We're not going to vote on this application tonight, but we're going to hear from whoever would like to be heard from. So,
Can we leave the public portion of the meeting open while we're in discussions?
yeah, it's going to
Okay.
be open. It's going to be kept open.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely.
Great. thanks.
Okay, so, Mr. Corcoran, without further ado, why don't you tell us what this is all about?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to be here on behalf of Josh and Maggie Oldfield in the Thayer Nursery. This is, I guess, the first night of the next step in efforts to reintroduce a landscaping business at the Thayer Nursery property on Hillside Street in Milton. It's a long-standing business that has been forced to sever some of its operations to operate from Canton, and we're here in response, I think, to an overwhelming vote of support from town meeting and from the town of Milton to allow that business to be reintroduced under tighter conditions than what previously were in place. I do have a PowerPoint presentation if we can get to it.
You're trying to turn the lights off?
Nope, I'm waiting for that to warm up.
No.
And I am joined at the table by the principals, Josh and Maggie Oldfield, who operate the nursery and the landscaping business.
Can everyone back there hear Mr. Corcoran?
Yes.
Good. I tend to, my voice tends to go, so if you don't, please make sure that you prod me to keep my voice up.
Can you see that with the light on or with the light off?
Probably with the light off.
You're on 1 and 1.
Perfect.
Okay, that's good.
Okay, so. All right, let's hope this works. So here we are. This is an aerial of the neighborhood at 10,000 feet. Just to quickly orient, I think everybody here knows where we are, but this is Randolph Avenue. This is Hillside Street. This is Forest Street. This is the area where primary portion of the nursery is located. Parkwood Drive is here, and Harland is here. And here's a sort of a closer look of the main property, and then This is the other property that's located across the street, where they do some ancillary components of their business. But primarily, we're focused on this property. And this is a look more closely. Historically, this is an aerial that was taken from Google Earth in August of 2013 that showed how the property was operated previously. All of the landscaping operations was sort of towards the easterly side. This was the mulch pile that I highlighted previously. The hard pack, dense area, very barely pervious in nature in terms of the ability to absorb water. A dusty, loud, and a difficult place, particularly for neighbors. The plan, as presented through the development of the bylaw and the presentation town meeting, is to relocate those functions, is to replant this area, relocate functions to this area, fence it, and make it much more quiet, much less difficult for surrounding properties to live with. This was a plan that we showed dated April 23. This was shown to town meeting as the proposed conditions planned with berm and fencing, new planted area, and whatnot. It's been updated a little bit, and so the plan that was filed with the application, again, a little difficult to see. What we've done is we've broken it down into smaller sections. Shows, again, this is Hillside Street, Forest Street, that most of this area over here becomes planted, and all of the proposed operations associated with the landscaping area is in this area in what they call a land care yard. This is a detail which unfortunately is difficult to pick up here, but you see a series of, this is the big wood barn. This is the series of bins where various materials would be stored, mulches, stone dust, other materials that would be available for delivery to customers and/or for retail sale at the site, and a larger set of bins located on the other side of this yard with all of the operations to occur in here. There is shows a sort of circular pattern, one-way pattern for trucks as they enter, generally to come around the barn and back into here, so that there's not a constant amount of backing and the backup light, beeper from the backing of the trucks. This is sort of a current look from the southerly border. The Lepore border is here, looking at the barn. The series of bins that would be placed in this area, and another series, the larger bins placed over here with the pattern of trucks coming around, and then fencing installed, as we'll show in a moment, along this boundary line. This is an example of material bins that would be placed alongside the barns. It would be sort of stone separated bins, and as shown on the plan, although you can't see it, there are proposed to be sprinklers at each end of the material to make sure that they don't overheat, that they stay moist in hot weather, so it doesn't dry and dust. There are, in fact, a total of 20 sprinklers that would be proposed, some existing and some additional proposed for the entire site to manage dust and to, obviously as necessary, to help them irrigate for trees and other products grown in the nursery as well. And this is another example of material bins as placed up against another barn. Is that Bunny? Mm-hmm. That's Bunny. This is Bunny Thomas's material bin on property that's over off of on Randolph Avenue. Currently, this was taken last winter. This is looking at the Lepore property. It's pretty wide open. There is vegetation, but as you can see, mostly deciduous, all on Lepore's property. Some placement of some evergreens in here. That is proposed to be modified with a fence that would run along that side. That fence would be 8 feet tall, would be set 15 feet in from the Lepore property line, and would run 270 feet approximately from the farther side of the rear of the barn over to a point that is almost to Forest Street. It would be, the exterior face of it would look sort of ornamental, cedar material with longitudinal wood. The interior face would have that supporting structure showing, but upon that surface will be placed a sound attenuation material. There's some materials that I presented we presented with the package, but it is a sound barrier system that would be set at 8 feet. This is just an example of how it is hung on a fence. The sound is in accordance with the description that we obtained from the engineer that we dealt with. It would reduce, at a minimum, the volume of sound by 50%. And the range of reduction is based significantly on sort of the range of pitch or decibel and cycle of the nature of the sound. So the higher the sound, the higher the pitch, the more of a treble-like sound. The attenuation is greater. The lower the pitch, sort of the bass sound, is less. That's a 50%. It increases or decreases on a range. And so the way it was described to me is that if someone comes along driving one of those cars where they've got the loud noise, the loud music, you hear the bass, and you hear the bass because you feel the bass. It's more of a vibration in the air, and you don't hear the treble because the treble sound is blocked by the interior insulation of the vehicle. So in any event, at least 50% of that will be attenuated associated with this barrier. There will be, and there has been some drainage work done. There's a drainage trench that's proposed to be installed along, or it has been installed along the southerly line that would, the plan of which is to redirect, well, the fear is that if without that drainage thing with the new berming and fencing, that drainage, stormwater coming down the hill of Forest Street that normally now comes across the property might get redirected into the Lepore property. And so the purpose of the drench is to catch that and to bring it along to a point on the other side of the barn, just beyond the end of the fence, come across to a catch basin or detention basin set now in the area on the other side of the barn, and it will discharge into the ground. In conjunction with that, with the removal of a lot of this pervious, the dense, thick, pervious surface, there will be much better capacity for the ground to absorb groundwater. And then finally, Josh has met with Joe Lynch, the town engineer, and John Thompson, and they've agreed to allow the installation of a catch basin on the northeasterly corner of the property to tie into the town's drain system within Hillside Street. And so that's an additional provision that we were working on but hadn't reached conclusion with the town engineer that will further pull drainage because the general flow of water is sort of southwesterly to northeasterly in that direction as it comes across. The topography generally runs in that direction. So some photographs of the installation of the drain. It's 2 feet deep, 3 feet deep, 3 feet deep with a pervious liner, with a pervious liner, with some thick, heavy rocks initially, followed by smaller, finer rock, and then this is the installation here that would be covered with dirt and some vegetation planted on top, but it would act as a French drain and bring it down from Forest Street, coming down towards the back of the barn. This shows former work area on the easterly side of the barn with the Roe Johanning property here, that's their swimming pool. All new grow-out area proposed. Some of that has been installed. Recently, Josh has there's a low swale in here that has been widened and increased in size to better manage some of the stormwater and to capture stormwater before it has a chance to leave the property, be redirected in this direction, ultimately tying into the new drain, the new manhole and connection to the town's drain system. But the fact that this is now becoming a pervious surface with grow-out area means that it will manage stormwater on that area of the property much better than what it had done before. We think it'll be a significant improvement as to how stormwater is managed. And so this is the work that's been recently done to widen that drainage, that swale area. And there's an installation now of a new retaining wall, a stone retaining wall, and some new berming on this is the property line here to the Roe Johanning property. This is back towards the barn. And the plan now is to install a fence found in a concrete pilings in this area with the top of fence to be at an elevation of what we call 194. So on the plan, the site plan, difficult to see, but the topography as shown on the on the GIS mapping, the elevation at this point on the ground is at elevation 182. It's the same, 184. The elevation of the shown on the Cole property and the Roe Johanning property as you cross over the fencing is at 182. The plan is to install a cedar fence similar to the one proposed for the Lepore property line. That would be the peak of that fence would be a constant 194. So it would be 12 feet effectively above the 182 property level at the rear of the property, the Roe Johanning property. This is another picture of the same site and a third. This is a photograph of a sprinkler that exists out in one of the grow areas. There are 20 sprinklers, as I said, to be spread throughout the property, and those sprinklers will be installed around the material bins to manage dust and whatnot. And we explain in the plan how and when, how often those sprinklers would be used, under what conditions they would need to be used, and whatnot. This is a detail of the area closer to the corner of Hillside and the Cole property. We're showing additional plantings to be installed along the Cole property. They were not interested in a fence. They are interested in additional evergreen plantings, and so that will be installed here. In the area where the new catch basin be and tying into the town's drain system is here. They need to go under. There's a stone wall here, which is historic. They'll go underneath that stone wall with that new catch basin catching stormwater as it comes in this direction and enters into the town system. I know there's been some discussion about firewood and firewood delivery trucks and how they work. This is a firewood delivery truck with what they call a walking floor. Basically, the truck would back into the wood barn. It's loaded, and this is it's an ingenious contraption. I do have access to a YouTube video that will show more specifically how it works. But this can be fully loaded. The floor It sits on top of a set of hydraulic moving sort of fingers. And the floor is moved out 1 foot. Those fingers then slide back underneath. As they catch, they come back forward, and they come back and catch, and slowly, 1 foot at a time, material is discharged off the back, and so they can discharge it out the back. So firewood can be discharged quietly and easily into the back, into the barn, where it can be stored and maintained, and it's done quietly. There's no raising and lowering of the dump level and whatnot. This is some information. It's difficult to see, but the notion is that when the dump trucks are initially loaded with wood inside the barn, that there's a clattering noise with respect to that as the initial 1 or 2 or 3 loads of wood from a bobcat are poured into the back of the dump truck with the metal bottom. The idea is that they will install sort of a 3/4 inch thick rubber matting, generally what's found in gyms, hockey rinks, thick, sound absorbing. They will be placed on the bottom of the dump trucks. It's actually good for the maintenance of the dump trucks because it will enhance the life of the dump trucks, but that will reduce the noise for the initial loading of trucks that would be inside the barn. Just showing a series of the existing lights. And as I put these photos together, I failed to identify which ones were which, so I asked Josh to help me sort of with these.
The one on the left is facing the wood barn.
From
That's
the-
on the right peak of our main showroom.
Okay. And the
The
one on the
one-
left,
That's just a regular floodlight, that
Floodlight.
one there.
okay.
But there is, on the opposite side, to mirror the same peak, is that the other light on the right-hand side.
Is this one?
Yep. And then that's off the spotlight that you showed earlier, Ned. It's in the peak just above that photo. No.
Yep.
Yeah,
So-
right there. It's to the left. It's just off the frame
Just
there.
off of
on the-
that?
Yeah.
Okay. And those, and then the rest are smaller at lower levels, some spots, some under, so just showing all of the lights on the various buildings. Obviously, the plan is to make sure that those are directed in such a way as they do not direct out into neighboring properties. And so, we think that is being done in a reasonable basis today, and we think that, subject to suggestions from the board as to how they might be changed, I think that works pretty well. Last slide deals with parking. We're proposing 34 spaces on the site. We use the calculations generally as required under the town's bylaw for various uses. There are a total of 34. I think it's 10 along here, 7 here, another set here, and then parking for trucks in the evening. It is a low-volume traffic and parking activity, with the exception of occasional high-volume activities such as sale of Christmas trees. There are occasions when parking is necessary on-street, and they use detail officers from the Milton Police to help direct and locate parking. But for the most part, for the purposes of landscaping, for their routine nursery business, we think 34 spaces is more than adequate to cover any visitor parking, any employee parking, and the parking of trucks and other vehicles on the site. And with that, it's a very brief, sweet, to the point. There's a lot of material that was presented in the written material and other materials with it. And I think it's more important at this point to hear comments from others and respond to comments and questions from the board at this point. So thank you for your time, and we'll look forward to responding.
Okay, thank you. Now, we have a couple of letters. One from Stephen Davis, who is negative about this application, and I don't know if he's planning to attend, but if he did, I mean, the people who testify, we anticipate the ability to ask them questions. And for people who write letters, obviously we can't ask them questions, and and the second letter is an unsigned document from, supposedly from Chris and Tina Stevens, but whether you know, I would hope that if people submit letters, they sign them, so we know that it's the final copy and it's something that they, in fact, want to be part of the public record. And we will make these part of the public record, and again, but they should be signed, and if the people writing the letters care to appear, that would be fine. And but we will receive letters, and our next meeting is on the 22nd. So we will certainly receive letters through the 22nd, through the time of our meeting on the 22nd. And there will be, on the 22nd, the hearing will be still open, and we will take further public testimony. But as I say, rather than go into the details of things like the wood barn and the wood operation and the amount of parking and many matters that we have questions about, let's hear from the public and see what their issues, if any, are. So that's what we're going to do. Anyone who would like to speak and raise their hands, and I will recognize them, and they may do so. Yes, sir, Mr. Dunn.
Good evening. Excuse me. My name is Matthew Dunn. I represent Philip Joenning and John Rowe. They reside at 23 Parkwood in Milton. I prepared a brief summary of their position with regards to the present application before the board that I'd asked to submit at this time. That'd be.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Did you make any copies?
I made a bunch. I didn't realize there was going to be this many people here today, but I'll pass out what I have, and I'm happy to provide copies, additional copies, when I can tomorrow or.
Well, get some to the board, and get one to Emily.
I've given Mr. Corcoran a copy. And I'd just like to go through some of the points that are made in the memo, because they give basically a general overview of my client's position, which is basically that the application is deficient in a few areas as it presently stands, and needs some more information in order to have this board make a fully informed decision on the special permit application. So, if you excuse me, I'm gonna paraphrase throughout, but I'll be following along in the memo, just so the people at home and the people who don't have a copy can just follow the the position of Mr. Joanning and Mr. Rowe. Again, they've identified in the application, which I reviewed, I've been a part of this process for over a year at this point through the contemplation of the bylaw amendment, its enactment, and now the application submitted by Thayer under it. So I'm intimately familiar with the requirements. And so as you'll see in the memo, what I've done is basically spelled out what each requirement is in each section of the bylaw, included what has been presented by Thayer in its application to date, and try to provide an analysis of what information is lacking in the application's present form, and in the attempt that we can flush that out, because I know that the main intent of the bylaw was to reintroduce landscaping, commercial use, in part to Thayer Nursery, and in doing so to provide some protection to this bucolic residential Scotswood neighborhood. And to try to find that balance, I recognize that the planning board has a difficult job. And there are a number of requirements that are in here that provide, that ask whether the call for specific plans, rules, and specifications to be outlined. And that's important because there's a provision in the bylaw amendment that talks about how those specific rules and regulations are going to be incorporated into the terms of the special permit, which in turn is important for the neighbors because it's going to give them a base to monitor Thayer's activities on the property and to be able to enforce whatever special permit is issued to make sure that there is that harmony exists between the commercial and the residential. So with that sort of long-winded introduction, I'll get into it. The stated purpose of the zoning amendment, and this is a quote, "to make the physical layout and day-to-day operations of each such landscaping business reasonably compatible with the interests of abutters and nearby residents in their rights to reasonable quiet enjoyment of their properties." And that's set forth in the first paragraph of the zoning amendment. Towards that end, it requires an applicant, in Thayer Nursery in this case, to provide and require enforceable specifics for the layout and operations of each of its the landscaping business in order to control dust, noise, light, and odor, and to promote safety, to reduce inconvenience to the neighboring residents, and to establish reasonable limits on the amount of infrastructure, equipment, and operations. In this case, just as a way of background, Thayer seeks a special permit in order to authorize and expand certain commercial landscaping, construction, and firewood sales business on its property. And those are the properties at 217, 237, 270 Hillside Street, as well as 0 and 24 Forest Street in Milton. And just so we're all on the same page, I'm going to be referring to those collective properties as the subject property of this application. So to introduce these commercial landscaping, construction, firewood sales business to the subject property, which were prohibited by the Board of Appeals in two decisions, the first one on September 26, 2013, and the second on February 11, 2014. In the application, just to flesh out what's going to be happening here, Thayer seeks the Planning Board's authorization, number one, to expand its existing retail sales operations to include a farmers and artisans market selling items and food created and grown off-site, introduce a snow and ice removal business and vehicles and equipment associated with it that have never operated on the premises. And Thayer looks to utilize this amendment in order to obtain zoning relief that's unavailable under any other zoning provision or under the Dover Amendment. There's been a ruling in the Norfolk Superior Court by Judge Davis that it's not entitled to that protection or that exemption under MGL 48, Section 3. So the relief they're seeking would be, if at all available, through the existing zoning amendment. So in assessing Thayer's application, it's important to keep in mind that the limited activities and uses that can be authorized under the zoning amendment that we're talking about here. That is, the activities for which the planning board can authorize by special permit under the zoning amendment are expressly limited to only those which were conducted on the property in 2012. Moreover, the zoning amendment restricts the size of those limited activities to a level no greater than the level that the activity existing in 2012, unless there is a reasonable showing that a greater level would be consistent with the purpose of the zoning amendment and cause no adverse effect on abutters or nearby residents. So the onus to do that, to show, first they would need to show that the activity was existing on the property in 2012. And then, if they want to, that's a baseline for the amount of activity that can be done there. And then if they want to increase the activity that was occurring in 2012, they have to make that showing that I just discussed. And there's been no showing of that. Simply put, the zoning amendment does not allow any applicant to introduce a new activity on the property and expressly limits the existing activities to the level at which the applicant was conducting them in 2012. Again, that can be found in the second paragraph of the zoning amendment. In this case, Thayer's application provides no information whatsoever about the size and scope of the retail sales and commercial landscaping, construction, and firewood sales businesses on the subject property in 2012. It also provides no evidence whatsoever that it ever operated a snow and ice removal business there. Without this baseline information, which is required under the zoning amendment, it would be impossible for the planning board to determine the appropriate size and scope of the commercial activities that Thayer seeks to undertake on the subject property through its special permit application. There's a provision in the bylaw that discusses plans, rules, and specifications. The zoning amendment requires Thayer Nursery to submit to the planning board plans, rules, and specifications, and other descriptive text and materials in a form suitable for the recording by a registered professional engineer. That can be found in paragraph 4 of the zoning amendment. Without question, this is the most important mechanism for accomplishing the stated objective of the zoning amendment, which is to make Thayer Nursery's landscaping business reasonably compatible with the interests of abutters and nearby residents and the rights to reasonably quiet and enjoy their properties. Because the plans, rules, and specifications approved by the planning board are incorporated into the special permit by reference and become enforceable requirements, terms and conditions of it. That can be found in paragraph 6. Despite the significance of this requirement, the current plan submitted by, or the current application submitted by Thayer Nursery does not come close to satisfying the specific requirements mandated by the zoning amendment. The zoning amendment requires Thayer to submit to the planning board a plan that shows the existing topography, buildings, structures, utility services, water and sewer lines, wells, drainage infrastructure, driveways, landscape, natural features, and areas of use. This is called for in paragraph number 4A of the amendment. This plan must be in a form suitable for recording by a registered professional engineer. Thayer's application does not satisfy this requirement. Rather, the plan that Thayer has submitted with its application only shows existing buildings, structures, driveways, landscape, natural features, and area of use. Nothing evidences the existence of the topography, utility services, water and sewer lines, wells, and drainage infrastructure, although there was a photograph that Mr. Corcoran presented, or a series of photographs that presented the well or the drainage ditch that was installed in the property. An appreciation of all these features is essential for the planning board to assess the sufficiency of the site changes proposed in Thayer Nursery's application. For example, without understanding the grade and slope of the subject property in relation to that of abutters, it is impossible for the planning board to assess whether the location and size of the proposed fence, sound wall, or vegetation will truly mitigate the effects of Thayer Nursery's commercial activities. As any decision of Thayer Nursery's application requires the planning board to fully understand these factors, the planning board should order Thayer Nursery to provide it with a more detailed plan showing all of the existing conditions on the subject property as a precondition to further considering Thayer's application. And really, what we're concerned about here is the drainage and the soundproofing, the effect of the sound and dust on abutting properties. And I'll get into the drainage plan now. The zoning amendment requires Thayer Nursery to submit to the planning board a plan that accounts for drainage and drainage infrastructure for the effective control of stormwater from the subject property. Now, we've seen the photographs, but we haven't seen a plan. Moreover, Thayer Nursery must show that its drainage measures will not cause adverse drainage impacts on neighboring properties and will not increase water flows into neighboring properties and will not create ponding on neighboring properties. These are all set forth in paragraph 4D of the zoning amendment. Thayer has made no such showing. At a bare minimum, Thayer must submit to the planning board a detailed drainage plan prepared by a professional engineer that illustrates and explains features, how the features proposed in it will contain and control the flow of water into neighboring properties. As drainage from the subject property is a long-standing problem that has caused substantial damage to Mr. Joenning and Mr. Rowe's home and property, in which it's actually it's getting worse. The planning board should order Thayer Nursery to provide it with a more detailed drainage plan as a precondition to further considering Thayer Nursery's application. Now, with respect to the landscaping plan, the zoning amendment requires that Thayer Nursery provide the planning board with a plan depicting landscaping along the lot lines. Again, the intent of the provision is to compel Thayer Nursery to demonstrate that its commercial activities can be done in a manner that is reasonably compatible with the interest of abutters and nearby residents and their rights to reasonably quiet enjoyment of their properties. This requires Thayer Nursery to take all necessary measures needed to buffer noise and dust emanating from the subject property to abutters and nearby residents, including but not limiting Thayer Nursery's erection of sound buffering walls or fences at least 15 feet from the lot lines of the subject property. This is required in section 4E of the zoning amendment. The specifications for all fences, walls, and sound buffering landscaping structures must be included as part of the plan that Thayer Nursery submits to the planning board. While Thayer Nursery's plans depict the landscaping along the property's lot lines, including locations of fences and vegetation, it's provided no evidence that these measures will truly buffer the noise and dust emanating from the subject property. If the planning board truly intends to protect the rights of abutters and nearby residents, then it would require Thayer Nursery to produce a plan that quantifies just how much the mitigation measures proposed by it will truly buffer noise created by vehicles, equipment, and activities used on the subject property. Without this pertinent information, the planning board should not issue any decision on Thayer's application. With regards to operations, Thayer Nurseries is to submit to the planning board a plan that specifically illustrates the driveways, the loading and unloading areas for on-site vehicular movement of trucks and other equipment used on the subject property. This is required in section 4F of the zoning amendment. This plan must specify procedures for trucks making deliveries and for the on-site operation of trucks and other equipment used on the subject property. The plan must also specify loading procedures for materials to be taken off-site for use in Thayer Nursery's landscaping business. Further, this plan must also specify hours of operation for loading and unloading operations and other use of noisy equipment. Paragraph number 7E of the zoning amendment sets forth the hours of operation for various activities proposed in Thayer's application. For example, it limits the time that Thayer can load or unload noisy equipment to the hours of 7 a.m. and 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, and 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. on Saturday. The zoning amendment prohibits any loading or the use of noisy equipment on Sundays. The hours proposed in Thayer's present application exceed those set forth in the zoning amendment and exceed those that were undertaken in 2012. In fact, these hours would be more, the hours proposed by Thayer with regards to its operation of the commercial activities would be more accommodating than even those presently permitted in commercially zoned districts in Milton, and are not allowed under the existing zoning amendment. Furthermore, Thayer Nursery's application provides only broad procedures for trucks making deliveries and for the on-site operation of trucks and other equipment used on the subject property. It provides similarly broad procedures for loading materials to be taken off-site for use in the landscaping business. The zoning amendment calls on Thayer to submit specific rules with respect to these matters. This is essential to any planning board decision Again, because such rules are incorporated into the special permit by reference and become enforceable requirements, terms, and conditions under it. Without them, there is nothing to govern these activities or to measure these activities. Accordingly, the planning board should take no further action on Thayer unless and until it submits this specific information. With regards to its parking plan, the zoning amendment calls on Thayer to provide the planning board with a parking plan that provides reliable analysis of the number of parking spaces needed for its business operations. This plan must show that the parking spaces for customers, employees, trucks when not in use, and other vehicles when not in use. Moreover, it must depict the storage spaces for other equipment used by Thayer Nursery on the subject property. The plan must show garages and illustrate layouts within them for parking and storage. This is all required under Section 4G of the zoning amendment. Thayer's present application does not satisfy this requirement. It merely recites the parking requirements set forth in the zoning bylaws for residential and retail uses. This does not account for all of the other uses that Thayer Nursery proposes to undertake on the subject property, including but not limited to the Farmers and Artisans Market, the Christmas tree sales, the Stone Kitchen, and other events. Such uses have a long and documented history of drawing large crowds to the subject property whose attendees park on the narrow surrounding streets because of insufficient parking on the premises. As such a condition poses a threat to the public's safety, health, and welfare, the planning board should require Thayer Nursery to submit a detailed parking plan prepared by a professional engineer that takes into account all of the proposed uses contemplated in Thayer's application. As for building plans, the zoning amendment requires Thayer Nursery to provide the planning board with a plan that shows all business buildings, storage bins, dumpsters, and other business structures on the subject property. This plan must include dimensions, square footage, location, setback from lot lines, elevations, utilities, and specification of business uses for which the interior space of any building or structure located on the subject property will be put. Again, Thayer's application does not satisfy this requirement. It has not submitted a plan that depicts any of these requirements. Instead, the information about business structures on the subject property is set forth in a narrative. This is insufficient because it does not illustrate the proximity of each activity to each other. For example, Thayer's narrative does not explain the 1,000-gallon diesel refueling tank is situated in the very same building where it engages in welding activities, and where it also stores several tons of kiln-dried firewood. Such obvious fire hazards should be known by the planning board in advance of making any decision to Thayer Nursery's application. Now, with respect to business activities, the zoning amendment requires Thayer to provide the planning board with a list that sets out the business activities for which it will engage in on the subject property. This list must identify any sales to be conducted there and include a description of each activity and its anticipated use of facilities on site, together with anticipated extent, times, and dates of activities. This can be found in the zoning amendment in paragraph 4I. Thayer Nursery's application satisfies this requirement. However, it should again be noted that Thayer has never utilized the subject property as a base for any snow or ice removal business. As such, it seeks to introduce this use to the premises using the special permit process provided in the zoning amendment. This is impermissible. Section 4J of the zoning amendment calls for a mitigation plan. Thayer Nursery is to provide the planning board with a plan that specifies the proposed measures it will take on the subject property to control noise, dust, offensive odors created by business operations from infringing upon the reasonable, quiet enjoyment of abutters and nearby residents. Its present plan does not specifically identify the likely sources of noise, dust, and odors, and it must specify the effective measures that Thayer will take to reduce and control them. Not only does Thayer not specify each likely source of noise, dust, and odor, it also fails to provide any evidence whatsoever that the effective measures that it does propose in its application will actually function to reduce and control the noise, dust, and odor emanating from the subject property. Without some kind of proof that Thayer's proposals actually work, there is no way that the planning board can conclude that the day-to-day operation of the subject property will not infringe upon the rights of abutters and nearby residents. This is specifically required, and is the purpose of the zoning amendment. Accordingly, the planning board should take no further action until Thayer's application is supplemented to include this specific information. With regards to the lighting plan that's called for in Section 4K of the zoning amendment, it requires Thayer Nursery to provide the planning board with a plan that shows all exterior lighting on the subject property. This provision is intended to provide Thayer with reasonably necessary low-level lighting while minimizing light spillover into neighboring properties and adjoining streets. Thayer's application does not presently satisfy that requirement. No plan has been submitted to the planning board that quantifies the intensity of the lighting used on the subject property or measures the light spillover onto neighboring properties and adjoining streets. Again, the information is necessary for the planning board to assess whether the day-to-day operations of Thayer's subject property will infringe on the rights of abutters and nearby residents. With respect to the street improvement plan called for in Section 4K of the zoning amendment, Thayer is to provide the planning board with a plan that illustrates the street improvements that it will undertake at Thayer's sole expense to permit safe access by trucks to and from the subject property. Thayer's present application does not satisfy that requirement. Instead, it merely states that Thayer will repair and improve as needed and in a timely manner any damage to the streets, shoulders, and adjoining properties. This completely ignores the fact that the commercial operations proposed on the subject property will involve a substantial amount of large truck traffic along the narrow and winding roads of the Scottswood neighborhood, an area with very limited sidewalk access. As such, large vehicle traffic could threaten the public health, safety, and welfare. Therefore, the planning board should require Thayer Nursery to submit an impact study that gauges the effects of this truck traffic on the neighborhood roadways and proposes street improvements that will mitigate its impact. With regards to the list of vehicles that was called for in Section 4N of the zoning amendment, it obligates Thayer Nursery to provide the planning board with a list that identifies the number and type of vehicles which are in use on the subject property on July 1st, 2013. In the event that Thayer intends to increase the number of vehicles from that base number, it must identify them to the planning board and provide it with an explanation as to why they are necessary for Thayer's business operations. Thayer's application does not satisfy this requirement. It has not provided the planning board with any list that complies with paragraph 4N, to my knowledge. Accordingly, that list should be provided before any action is taken on its application. Section 4O of the zoning amendment prohibits Thayer Nursery from using loudspeakers or playing amplified music on the subject property. It also mandates that all vehicles and equipment used by Thayer Nursery on the subject property be shut off and not left idling while not in use. Despite this clear requirement that's specifically set forth in the zoning amendment itself, Thayer's application seeks the planning board's permission to use loudspeakers and play amplified music on the subject property during events. Again, the zoning amendment prohibits this, and this planning board should deny that request. With regards to the firewood plan that's called for in Section 4P of the zoning amendment, it requires Thayer Nursery to provide the planning board with a plan that shows the specifics of and procedures for its receipt, storage, and delivery of firewood from the subject property. This plan must explain how Thayer Nursery will ensure the safe and reasonably quiet deliveries will be made to the subject property, and delivered firewood be safely stored on it, and the firewood will be loaded on the subject property and delivered off-site in a safe and quiet manner. Now, there was Attorney Corcoran did present some photographs of the trucks that Thayer proposes to use. But this would be, what the bylaw it calls for, again, is specifics. Thayer's application provides only broad procedures for its receipt, storage, and delivery of firewood on the subject property. The zoning amendment calls for Thayer Nursery to submit specific rules with respect to these matters. This, too, is essential in any planning board decision because, again, these rules are incorporated into the special permit by reference and become requirements, terms, and conditions of it. Without them, there is nothing to govern or gauge these activities. Accordingly, the planning board should require Thayer Nursery to supplement its application with this information. Thayer's application proposes that the planning board also allow it, again, to sell snow and ice removal services. The zoning amendment itself does not allow it to do so. As stated in paragraph 2 of the zoning amendment, an applicant cannot introduce a new activity on its property that was not undertaken by it in 2012. In this case, Thayer has not presented any evidence that it utilized the subject property to sell snow and ice removal services in 2012. Consequently, it cannot obtain a special permit under the present zoning amendment to introduce this new use. Section 4R of the zoning amendment calls on Thayer, prohibits Thayer Nursery from extending the scope of items sold on the subject property and hours of operation for its sales office beyond their 2012 levels. Again, in order to determine whether Thayer Nursery can comply with this requirement, it is necessary for it to provide the planning board with an inventory, sales report, or other accounting records from 2012. However, this information was not included in Thayer's present application. Without it, the building commissioner cannot assess whether Thayer Nursery has complied with the provisions of the zoning amendment, in addition, or the special permit. In addition, the hours of operation for Thayer Nursery sales office exceed their 2012 levels, the hours that are proposed in its present application, as well as those outlined in the zoning amendment itself. Therefore, the planning board must reduce those hours to the 2012 levels or those called for in the zoning amendment. It will also require Thayer Nursery to provide it with an inventory, sales reports, and other accounting information for its activities in 2012 in order to create that baseline that's called for in the zoning amendment. Now, with regards to some of the requirements set forth in paragraph 7 of the zoning amendment, it requires Thayer Nursery to explain how its landscaping business will comply with several other requirements. As will be explained, Thayer's application fails to provide adequate explanation